Hi, I'm Amy, and this is House of Nash Eats. And today we are making my perfect pie crust. This is the pie crust that I use for all of my pies. It turns out amazing every time. I know a lot of people are intimidated about making a homemade pie crust from scratch, but it's really not as hard as you think it might be. This recipe is going to help you have pie crust success every time. I love to make these and have them on hand in the freezer because they freeze great, and then I always have a pie crust anytime I need it. So skip the store-bought crust, make it from scratch, and you'll be so happy that you did. Let's get started making a pie crust. So to make a pie crust, there are a few tools. Today I'm going to use my food processor just to make it a little easier and faster. But if you don't have a food processor, you can use one of these. It's a pastry cutter, and you can use it to cut the shortening and the butter into the flour. And it works great. This is what I grew up using. This is what my mom and grandma taught me how to use to make a pie crust. The food processor is just a little quicker, so that's what we're using today. So to start out with, there are only a few ingredients in pie crust. There's all-purpose flour, some salt, a little bit of sugar, which you can leave out if you're doing a savory pie, but even when I'm doing chicken pot pie, I use a little sugar in my pie crust, some shortening, and some butter, and then ice water. The reason we do both shortening and butter is because the combination of the two fats gives you the two qualities you're looking for in a really great pie crust. You want the buttery flavor that you get from the butter, but also the structure and the light flakiness that you really only achieve when you have shortening in the mix. So that's why we're using some of each. So to start out, we're going to put our flour into the food processor, along with the salt and just a little sugar. And then we'll put our lid on and pulse that to combine. Okay, another key to making a really good pie crust is to have really cold ingredients. So my shortening and my butter just came out of the fridge. You might even want to put them in the freezer for 15 minutes before making your pie crust, especially if it's summertime and your kitchen is hot. You really want these to be cold because they give you the best texture and the best finish to your pie crust. So first, I use the shortening, and then I've cubed my cold butter just to make it a little bit easier to pulse into my flour. And we're going to pulse this not too much, just until it makes about pea-sized crumbs. That looks great. So once you've got your butter and shortening pulsed into the flour to have about crumbs the size of peas, we're going to add some ice cold water, just a little bit at a time, about a tablespoon at a time, and we'll continue to pulse and incorporate it and stop when the dough starts coming together. You may not need all of the water. Okay, I can see my dough is starting to combine, but I'm going to add that one last tablespoon just to make sure it's nice and combined. Okay, and if you were adding the water by hand, just mix it together with a spatula or a fork until the pie crust dough is moistened and starts coming together. So now this looks fantastic. We're going to take this off and turn it out onto our counter and knead it together a little bit till it comes into a clump. Okay, so we're going to take the blade out of the food processor, and we'll dump the dough out onto a clean counter. And then just use your hands to gather this all up together, and it should start to come right together into a ball. So just knead it together until it comes into a ball. Pie crust is something I grew up making in the kitchen with my mom and my grandma and my aunts. Especially at holidays, we'd work together to get the meal ready, and making the pie crust was my job. So I love it. It's one of my favorite things to work with. So once you've got a nice big disc, you're going to use a sharp knife or this tool, it's my bench scraper, to cut it right in half. This recipe makes enough dough for 2 pie crusts, either a top and a bottom, or 2 blind baked pie crusts if you're doing like a cream pie filling. And you can just shape these into a disc. Okay, so now I'm just going to put this pie crust on my plastic wrap and wrap it up. I'm gonna flatten it out a little bit more. Now at this point, you can stick it in the fridge for an hour so it's easier to work with. Or you can put it in the freezer and it will be good in the freezer for about 3 months. Just let it thaw overnight in the fridge so it's cold, and let it sit out on the counter for about 15 minutes so it's easy to roll out the next day. And you can use this pie crust for any of my pie recipes. I'll drop links to some of my pie recipes below. Some of my favorites are a blackberry pie, a peach pie. It's great with a banana cream pie. There's so many pie flavors that you can use this one recipe for. Okay, so I've got my pie crust out of the fridge. It's been chilling for about an hour, so it should be really nice and easy to work with. So now we're going to roll it out. This is the part where I think a lot of people get a little intimidated or scared, but it's so much easier than you would think. So I've got some extra flour for flouring my surface so it doesn't stick, my handy rolling pin, my bench scraper, and a pie plate. And then I also have a little paring knife to trim the edge with. So first, I'm going to flour my surface and be pretty generous. You don't want your pie crust to stick. And I roll my rolling pin in it so that's not too sticky either. So a really good pie crust, you should be able to see little specks of butter and shortening, like a little marbled look to it. That's the mark of a really good pie crust that's going to bake up nice and flaky, because as the butter and shortening melt when they've been kept really cold, that's going to add those layers of flakiness along with that butter flavor. It's why I love a butter and shortening crust so much. Okay, so now we're going to sprinkle the top of our pie crust with a little flour, rub it around. Okay, so now we're going to take our rolling pin and we're going to roll it out into a circle and just use short strokes, getting longer, kind of pressing from the center, working outwards, and switch the direction that you're rolling. And when I get it a little bit rolled out, I like to check it underneath and make sure it's not sticking. So you can lift it up with your bench scraper if you need to and add a little bit of extra flour so it doesn't stick to your surface. Don't be afraid to use a little flour. You want to roll this out until your pie crust is slightly larger than your pie plate. And I use this crust recipe for a 9 to 9.5, even a 10-inch pie plate, this will work for. When it's slightly larger than your pie plate, you're ready to transfer it. So I am going to use my bench scraper to go underneath the dough and make sure it's not sticking to my surface. And then I use my rolling pin to help me lift and transfer to the pie plate. So I'm going to roll my pie dough up. And then I'm just going to use that to help me lift my pie dough in place. Perfect. And it just nestles right down in there, so it's nice and snug. And if some tears off, it's no problem. Just press it back into place and it should go right back together. Okay, then I like to trim the edges of my pie crust and tuck the edges under to make a nice finish. So just use a sharp knife. You could use kitchen scissors to do this, to just trim around the edge. I leave about 1/2 inch to 1 inch overhang. I love pie crust. It's like one of my favorite parts of a pie. So I like to make sure I have a generous crust on the outside. This is also a really good way of making sure if you're blind baking a pie that it doesn't shrink up too much. If you make sure to leave a little bit extra crust around the edge. Okay, once you've got that done, you can fill in any spots with extra pieces of scraps of pie crust dough. Like I've got a little spot here that fell apart. So I'm just going to add some dough there and call it good. And then your scraps of dough, don't toss these. Just roll them out flat and put them on a baking sheet with some cinnamon and sugar on top and bake them for 10 to 12 minutes. At 375 degrees, it's such a great treat. Okay, so now I'm going to fold the edges under so we have a nice clean finish to the pie crust. Okay, and then there are lots of ways to finish the pie crust. You're going to want to crimp the edges. I'm going to use my favorite method, which is the scallop method, where I just use my thumb and forefingers to pinch and make a scallop. Some other ideas are to use the tines of a fork to make a fun rustic looking edge. Use a spoon, anything you can come up with. You could braid some extra pie crust dough and just lay that around the edge of your pie for a braided crust. There are so many ways to get creative when you're making pie and working with homemade pie dough, but this old-fashioned scallop is my favorite. I remember my mom showing me how to do this when I was a kid. Okay, there you have it. Here is my pie crust. It is ready to go. You could fill it right now and bake it. You could blind bake it, where you cook the pie crust by itself and then fill it like with a cream filling. That's how I do banana cream pie or coconut cream pie. You could fill it with a fruit filling and then roll out your other pie crust to put on top, making a lattice crust or just a solid crust. There's so many ways you can use this pie crust. I use it in so many recipes. I would love to know in the comments below which pie recipe you want to make first. Be sure, if you like this recipe, to like and subscribe to my channel and come back for more.